time, participation, contributions, and your one-of-a-kind, much sought-after contribution. To Salim Eddy from Google, Salim, a thank you to Google for providing us with the online meeting platform and YouTube channel technologies for this morning's event titled Life Within 6 Feet, the Impact of Social Distancing on Society. Offering a few opening remarks is National Council on U.S. Arab Relations founding president and CEO, Dr. John Duke Anthony. Dr. Anthony is no stranger to the Emirate of Dubai and the United Arab Emirates. His firsthand empirical knowledge actually predates the 1971 UAE independence from British treaty relations for external affairs and defense. In fact, Dr. Anthony was invited to the UAE as an observer prior to the formation of the United Arab Emirates. A frequent visitor and the only American to have been invited to attend each and every Gulf Cooperation Council, ministerial and heads of state summit since 1981, the first held, of course, in the United Arab Emirates, we have all benefited from Dr. Anthony's voluminous writings on Arabia and the Gulf, and his leadership in introducing and connecting American leaders and our next generation of leaders to the UAE, the Middle East, and the Islamic world. Dr. Anthony will provide some welcoming remarks this morning and turn the program over to Mr. Joshua Yaffe, a National Council on U.S. Arab Relations scholar in residence and a full-time Arabian Peninsula specialist at the United States Department of State. Dr. Anthony.
Thank you, Patrick. Mr. Mohammed Bahroun and your colleagues, Astiqai, Ahlan wa sahlan. This is a wonderful opportunity for us to cooperate together at a time when people are not only expected to think out of the box, but in terms of what you're doing, try also to act out of the box. We're in an uncertain era, ERA, but possibly also ERROR, in the sense that the best minds need to be brought to these challenges, these issues. This is unprecedented, and this requires a degree of humility among all of us, and to realize that we do little more than stand on the shoulders of those who went before us and provided Muassasat, a foundation upon which we could build. Now, looking at the implications, both short-term and longer-term, of this crisis that we're in, puts us into uncharted water. We need to be clear of what is constant and what is changing, and the implications of both in terms of people's needs, people's legitimate needs, people's legitimate concerns, people's legitimate interests, and people's legitimate goals to improve their life and the well-being of all that they love and with whom they live. In my country, where the government has been drifting and on some days running away from the concept of global cooperation, what you are doing with Behooth has been to challenge that and to indicate, using facts, using hard evidence, rooted in reality, that we have no choice but to cooperate globally. When I first lived in Dubai, there were two international class hotels, one on the Dubai side of the creek called Airlines Hotel, and the other on the other Dira side of Carlton Hotel. Now, Mark Morozek tells me you have 542 hotels. That looks like a typographical error, but this is a hallmark of what you have become in terms of an international transit point for those going to the west from the east and those going to the east from the west. Tourism, of course, has been hurt massively on a global scale, less so perhaps in Dubai than a country like Tunisia. After the government has an employer there, it's tourism and hotels that are the backbone of the employment of so many Tunisians. And so the implications and the pain and the suffering for many countries and people is enormous and beyond description, especially in the realm of unemployment. And unemployment is related to a person's dignity, her or his pride, her or his confidence that they can address effectively. I don't like to use the word successfully and failure. That's too harsh and strong and unnecessary. To be effective is acceptable enough. And all of us this morning are exactly trying to accomplish an objective like that. I would like to turn the program over to Mr. Joshua Yaffe, an analyst for Arabia and the Gulf in the U.S. Department of State, to introduce this morning's players, speakers, addressers. Josh Yaffe.
Thank you, Professor Anthony. I really appreciate that. I'm here in my role as a scholar in residence at the National Council on U.S. Arab Relations, and I'm very proud to represent the organization in that regard. It's a wonderful organization that's been very kind to me over the years, and I'm glad to be able to return the favor in any way that I can. Thank you for those wonderful remarks, Professor Anthony. They're very, very kind and gracious, especially towards our partners, who I also want to thank. Mohammed Baharoun, our counterpart in Dubai, has been fantastic to work with. And I'll tell you that the genesis for this conference, the reason why this came about is with him and I talking about all of these webinars and teleworked conferences that are going on among the think tanks these days. One thing that's hard to escape is the fact that half of the experience is lost when you're not there physically in the room with the participants live right in front of you. Half of the fun of any think tank event is networking. Being there with human beings to be able to exchange the business cards, get to know folks, and establish meetings on the sidelines to see what's going on in people's lives and their work. And that's all lost. And that means what you're left with is the pure discussion. And that can be very hit or miss depending on the venue, the speakers, the organization. And so Mohammed and I, sitting down thinking about that a couple months ago, felt that if you're going to put on these online events in a think tank mode, it has to be so much more effort and thought and care put into them than you would have done prior to the coronavirus. Speakers have to be more carefully chosen and topics more carefully prepared, questions presented in a more thoughtful, targeted way, because really everything stands on the discussion at this point when you're online. And hence that led us to the topic of the day, as you see from the title, Life Within 6 Feet. Again, that was Mohammed's idea for the title. I give him full credit for it. And it is an expression of the experience we are all in, but even as think tanks and think tanks dealing with the Middle East. How do you not only take what you were doing before and shift it online, but how do you take advantage of the moment to do things new, to do things better, to expand in ways you might not otherwise have done before? This is really a moment in which certain organizations are going to fall behind and certain ones are going to come out ahead based on their creativity. And that's a challenge for all of us because none of us know how long this will go on or what the future holds or how long it will last or what society is going to expect from us coming out of it. And really, those are the biggest questions, and we'll get to those towards the end. And for that purpose, we're very lucky to have Dr. Anita Blanchard with us, who is a social psychologist who can address some of these perspectives from an academic perspective. But before we get to all of that, I want to start it out going down the list of our speakers as presented, and that means we're going to have a bit of a technology focus at the beginning. So first up, I'd like to introduce Rafiq Maki. Rafiq is head of technology and a fellow at Mubadala Ventures. Previously, he was the executive director of planning at the Abu Dhabi Education Council. He was vice president for research at Masdar Institute of Science Technology. He was involved in a number of universities, including UAE University, and was involved with Global Foundries, which is a fantastic company here in America, doing great industrial work. So for Mr. Rafiq, and we welcome any comments or thoughts that you may have, but I'd also like to open it up with you to discuss a bit of corporate culture. Are we seeing a shift in corporate culture? Are we seeing a stronger emphasis on chief technology officers? And how's that impacting corporate decision-making? So first, let's turn it over to Rafiq and see what some of your thoughts are. Mr. Rafiq?
Thank you, Joshua. We are certainly facing the crisis of the century. I think there's no doubt about that today. Its impact on our society has been tremendous. It has reached nearly every city, every village, every neighborhood, just about every corner on the planet. And social distancing, the topic at hand, has affected just about every aspect of our life. The way we work, the way we eat, the way we shop, entertainment, education, travel, manufacturing, and of course, the way we socialize. And if you look at recent reports on the economic impact, and specifically the impact on jobs, they're really frightening. There's been a historic contraction of per capita income globally. And it's been, Joshua, the largest of its kind since 1870. There's been tremendous losses in work hours. And the United Nations estimates that these losses in work hours are the equivalent of some 300 million full-time jobs globally for 2020. Those are really, really amazingly bad statistics. Some sectors of the economy have been devastated, and some of those may not recover. But in all this darkness, and as always, there's always a silver lining here. And history has taught us that almost always humanity emerges from such crises stronger, smarter, richer. Give you an example, the Spanish flu of 1918, by some estimates, infected nearly a quarter of the entire global population. And by some estimates, killed up to 50 million people. But many don't know that it actually shaped the future of medicine in a number of ways. One of which is that the substantial advancement of the field of epidemiology, which has saved countless of lives over the next 100 years and to this day. And today, thanks to social distancing, some sectors of the economy are actually thriving. These would include offline services such as food delivery, online shopping, and all the logistics associated with that. Home and consumer goods are doing very well. Software as a service is doing very well. Gaming is doing extraordinarily well. Digital media, work from home technology, and of course, all the supporting infrastructure for that. So data centers, the cloud, and the associated services there. And I'd like to give two examples, Joshua, on technology that's impacting us in some positive ways today. So let's start with video. This is the medium we're on today. So it's estimated that video will consume 1.9 zettabytes, that's a lot of bytes, this year, 2020. That's up 12% from 2019. Now, what does that mean, that 12%? That's an extra 200 billion hours of video calls or movie viewing. An extra 200 billion hours. So we normally think of video as a service, but there's major infrastructure behind all of it and benefiting from it. The communications industry and all of its components, from network providers to cloud systems to mobile apps and ICT security. I mean, this is a massive area of the economy, and it's accelerating 5G deployment and research towards 6G in the future. It might also impact legislation in terms of internet access. Internet access is becoming a right, especially in this environment. It's not just a privilege today. It's actually becoming a right. It's an essential thing that humanity needs today. So video is not just a service, but it's becoming an enabler of innovation. And it's expected to drive new experiences, like new shopping experiences, new types of apps, live streaming promotions, and augmented reality. The other example I want to give is in the area of therapeutics. And I want to do that because we are living in amazing times in terms of technology and its impact on our lives and its impact today under COVID. So just consider just consider how fast scientists were able to sequence the virus that causes COVID, the SARS-CoV-2 virus. I mean, within a few weeks, we knew the DNA composition of the virus, how many DNA base pairs it has. We knew the proteins it uses to latch onto our cells and invade our cells and go inside of our cells, and issue a program that orders our cells to duplicate the virus. And all this thanks to next generation DNA sequencing and gene editing technology. And scientists are using these, especially CRISPR, which is the preeminent gene editing technology today, and machine learning to help identify drugs that can interfere in this process and prevent the virus from attaching to our cells. So we're using machine learning to understand the composition of these proteins and how we can actually develop therapeutics that can interfere with these proteins and prevent a specific protein that is associated with SARS-CoV-2 from attaching to a specific protein in our cells. Amazing technology we have today. We're talking about a vaccine in a year to 18 months. This would be unbelievable. And normally when you talk about a vaccine, you talk about it in terms of 10 years or 15 years. So in many ways, the pandemic is actually accelerating the R&D cycle to develop not just therapies for COVID, but also the fight on tough diseases like cancer and Alzheimer's, because some of the same innovation that's going into therapeutics for COVID can be used to fight other diseases. And machine learning is playing a key role here as a first line of defense also for the pandemic. Hospitals are scanning faces to check temperatures. Of course, you've all heard about the use of contact tracing apps. And there's other interesting applications. And one of my favorite applications of machine learning here is a project by Carnegie Mellon University. Carnegie Mellon University is actually analyzing voice and trying to detect COVID by analyzing people's voices. In fact, people listening to this webcast can go online to the CMU website and participate in this study by simply recording your voice. So to cap off here my introductory comments, COVID has had a disproportionate impact on different sectors of the economy and the workforce. But if anything, Joshua, we humans are very resilient. We suffer, yes, but we always innovate, we adapt, and eventually we'll beat this thing. There's no question in my mind.
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much, Rafiq. And I love looking in the background where you are, because you've got a book there with a picture of Sheikh Zayed on the back. And Sheikh Zayed was really a man who embraced technology, moving to Abu Dhabi when there was nothing there and helping to build that place from the ground up. I think he would definitely approve of this topic today. So with that, I want to go to our guest, Nasser Al-Sheikh. Nasser, it's wonderful to have you with us. Nasser Al-Sheikh is the chairman of Emirates National Holdings. In the past, he's been Director General of the Dubai Department of Finance, head of the Finance and the Executive Office of His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid, and Vice Chairman of the National Bonds Corporation, among member of board of numerous entities and corporations. He's had a very storied career in finance in Dubai at the top of that mountain. And I want to turn it to Nasser, and I want to ask you a similar question, Nasser, about corporate culture today. Are we seeing a shift in the corporate culture to a stronger emphasis on technology and a stronger role for chief technology officers? And what does that mean for long-term investment strategies? Nasser?
Thank you, Joshua. I mean, first of all, I'd like to thank the National Council of U.S. and Arab Relations and Buhut for having me among this, distinguished group of minds, great minds, if I may say. Well, I mean, I think we've, everyone has been talking a lot about, what the world has been going through over the past 4 months. And I think basically what happened, we were all caught off guard, you know. When I look at impact, of course, I mean, I do not want to go, global and so on. I would like to focus on the story from the GCC, the story from the United Arab Emirates. But when I look at the impact over here, we basically had no choice. If I look at a city like Dubai, all of a sudden, I mean, a city like Dubai, which houses the world's busiest airport, when you look at, international visitors, fourth most visited city on earth, all of a sudden the engine is shut, and for 3 weeks we had 24-hour, 24/7 curfews. So I mean, we like to look to talk. I mean, we're talking about technology and so on. We'd like to talk about disruptive innovations, but here we had a disruptor that just caught us off guard, and it redefined our lives. So I mean, whatever angle you look at it from, we were not prepared. And you see the experiences from one country to the other and so on. And I think the first couple of months or 3 months were basically a period of learning. We're facing an enemy that we do not know anything about. And the safest thing was just to shut down completely. And when I say shut down, I mean, you talk about commerce, you talk about shutting life, shutting down life as we know it. So even kids, were not able to go to schools. People were not able to report to work. I mean, so all that changes. It was it took a while for us to absorb that hit. And I think today we're in a position where we know a bit more about it. We don't claim that the danger is over. The enemy is still out there, maneuvering, looking for a comeback maybe. But we feel a bit better that today we're better prepared to deal with it. So looking at corporates, I think one of the first things that every single corporate that I'm associated with or I know of, I mean, one of the first things that they had to think about is business continuity, and this is where technology was very important, because technology enabled all of us as companies, as education providers. I mean, it enabled us, I mean, just to carry on with our lives, even in a completely different format. Where do we go from here? I think as we go along in the discussion, I mean, we will be focusing on certain angles. But when it comes to corporates, I mean, I think our CTOs the most important. Maybe in month 1, month 2, CTOs were the most important. But I think as we go along, I think the CFOs are becoming more important. Businesses, I mean, with businesses, I mean, if they cannot remain in existence, there is no point of technology. I mean, no one can revive that. So I think, I think it's a bit more complex than that. And I think as we go along in the discussion, I mean, we will be covering more angles.
Okay, very good. Thank you so much, Nasser. We appreciate that. Next, we'd like to turn to Dr. Omar Al-Ubaidi. So Dr. Omar is Director of Studies and Research at Dirasat, which is based in Bahrain. It's the Center for Strategic International and Energy Studies. He did his PhD in economics from the University of Chicago. And Dr. Omar, I'd like to turn the same question over to you, but in a slightly different aspect. How does this shift toward tech-based social interactions, how is that changing strategy for how governments manage economies, and how economies have to shift? What long-term implications do you see from this tech shift that we all are taking right now? Dr. Omar?
So first of all, thank you very much for the invitation to participate today. I think that one important implication of the shift to tech is that we're going to have potentially very different real estate property value curve in cities and potential big urban urbanization. So to elaborate, since the urban revolution started a few hundred years ago, we've had city centres where real estate values are very high because people need to be close to wherever it is their entertainment work. And that's a pretty stable and universal feature of property markets. If the transition to remote working, both in the government and in the private sector, continues, and coupled with people preferring remote entertainment and not needing to go to movie theatres, not needing to go to restaurants, not needing to go to museums, and so on and so forth, then the property prices, or the whole configuration of cities might need to change. And this could be very disruptive to all sorts of social institutions that are based on this existing relationship between land and property ownership and wealth and social station. So, in the near term, this is not something which is going to have an impact because this will have to be something that evolves over time. But when we're talking about 30 and 40 years horizons, especially with the Sustainable Development Agenda, New Urban Agenda from the United Nations, we can see a fundamental transformation in the way cities are done, and with it, the social strata and the relationships between different classes. And that's potentially a good thing, potentially a bad thing. I guess environmentally, it definitely is potentially a good thing because it decreases the need for some of the commuting and some of the heavy pressure on certain types of infrastructure, and it affords us greater flexibility in how we design cities. Probably means lower security threats from having so many important installations in one place. So that probably is a less of a headache for the government. But as I say, so many of our social interactions are based on this quite stable model of property prices. And it'll be interesting to see how that evolves. I don't think anybody has a good sense of which way it's heading.
Fantastic. Thank you, Omar. And I love what you say, and I want to be able to come back to it later. That we're not just seeing a shift in how society interacts. We may also be seeing a shift in how social classes interact because of the way that people shape their lives within cities and how cities will be transformed. If you can turn off your microphone for a minute, Dr. Omar, we're going to move on to Dr. Anita. Dr. Anita Blanchard, we're very grateful to have you here with us. She is Associate Professor of Psychology and Organizational Science in the Department of Psychology at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. She's author of numerous peer-reviewed articles and book chapters, all dealing with technology and social behavior, more than I can possibly enumerate here. And importantly, at UNCC, she's involved in the Virtual Identity Community and Entitativity Lab, which is an interdisciplinary research team exploring how people come together in person and online to identify as groups and what that means to identify as groups. I'd like to ask Dr. Anita, if I can, how does the current extended period of social distancing impact the formation of social capital? And you can take that in any direction that you like, Dr. Anita, but if I can turn it over to you, that'd be great.
Thank you, Josh. Thank you so much for having me be a part of this. This is an amazing experience for an academic to actually get to talk to people who are making real decisions and doing this. So I want to give you information that is useful for you from the research that we know. So a couple of things. I've been studying online groups and virtual communities for over 25 years. And I have a lot of thoughts and hopefully some information to share with you. But three things I want you to think about in analyzing and looking forward of how we can make things as successful as possible, both for organizations, for work, as well as for society. So the three things to think about: first, humans have an innate need for belonging. We need to be part of groups. And the one thing that concerns me most about what's happening in the pandemic is people becoming isolated from their groups at work, which are very meaningful. I agree with, I think Mr. Anthony said that. groups at work, as well as groups in our society. So we need to belong to groups, and that's as important a psychological need as eating is for a biological need. So the need for belonging is very important. So we need to facilitate, make policies in society and in organizations that help people belong. The other part I want to talk about is when we think about groups, so that's what they want to belong to, groups. What does it mean to be a group? And there's a very key term, a key concept in research in social psychology and organizational psychology that I want to share with you and give you an idea about so that you can use it in making your own ideas. It's a very fancy word. It's called intitativity. And in fact, because I'm a professor, I made a spreadsheet for you. So it's intitativity, and I have 2 things to provide it to you. So the reason it's a fancy word is because it actually means the groupiness of a group. Okay, I'm going to put that back. I'll put that back up in a second. It means the groupiness of a group. So I want you to imagine driving by a bus stop and seeing people waiting to take a bus, and they are probably not looking at each other. They're on their phones. They're facing the same way. They're not talking. You might say to yourself, look at that group of people at the bus, but it's not really that much of a group. Now consider those same people at a coffee shop, sitting around a table together, and this is pre-pandemic imagination, right? Sitting around a table together, sharing conversations, coffee, maybe even sharing food. That's very much of a group of people. So intitativity, the difference here, is our variability between the bus stop and the coffee shop. Okay, and you can think about looking at it. You can also imagine yourself waiting for the people at the bus stop or the coffee shop. The reason that is key is people do not become part of the group until some switch in their head goes above a certain level of intitativity. They have to think this is a group before they start participating, interacting, feeling attachments, trying to create norms of behavior, before they have satisfaction, commitment, before they belong, and it's important to them. So we have to think, when we're looking at groups online, particularly, how do we increase the intitativity of that so that we have positive work experiences, so that we have positive experiences in social capital. The reason this is important for social capital is we've got to make sure people's online groups interact with their face-to-face groups. And that's a key thing we need to worry about. Otherwise, it doesn't matter. My children play Roblox. It's some kind of weird computer game. I didn't let them play it beforehand until I found out they were playing it after the pandemic with their friends. I'm like, this is fantastic social capital. I honestly changed my ideas about what they could do because they were interacting with people face to face normally that they would do online. So I hope we can have conversations where I can bring back intitativity for online meetings, for online groups, for how we can encourage that in social capital and other things. But those are the things I really want to help you all understand. Thank you very much. I'm glad. Thank you so much, Josh, for having me here.
Well, okay, and I want to be able to come back to that later because what Anita's raising is a critical question for us. If there's an essential need for belonging in groups that's essential to humanity, and there's a certain level that we reach where we reach a critical mass of feeling that we belong, and at which point you can say that we're all part of a collective endeavor and we're all achieving certain goals together, whether it be in the boardroom or whether it be in the government, then how do the tech-based interactions that we're all experiencing raise that bar towards at which point we can all feel that we're taking part and shaping something together. But let's come back to that in a minute. Let's go first to Salim. Salim Ede, thank you for joining us so much, Salim. You are Director of Public Policy and Government Relations at Google Middle East and North Africa. Previously, he was the Vice President for Government Relations at SAP. And before that, he worked with Cisco Systems, IBM, Hewlett-Packard, a number of companies. Salim, I'd like to turn to you. And in a slightly related question, I'd like to ask, based on your observations of working with companies and advising companies and governments on what products Google offers and how to improve their technology base and use technology better, what do you witness in terms of how technology is helping corporations to bring teams together in synergy? Do they lose any of that synergy when corporate functions have to go online? Do groups in the workplace, in the experiences that you have, are they losing anything by having to transfer all of their interactions onto web-based platforms, or are they being enhanced in other ways? Celine, can I turn it over to you?
Sure. Thank you, Joshua. And it's a real pleasure to be here today with distinguished speakers. So there is this contradiction with technology that we are promoters of disruption, right? I think Professor Anthony talked about uncharted territories and uncertain times. So this is when we thrive, and that's when we prosper, and then when we add value to the community. And I must say that the rate of innovation actually has always been fast, and we always were saying we would keep learning all the time. And maybe, with the COVID situation, some people felt that time has stopped. Actually, it has not. We all know innovation is accelerating, and so I'm not saying something you don't know, that the rate of innovation is accelerating. But what's really interesting, and maybe this is the first observation, is that the rate of adoption of technology has increased tremendously. So, for the digitizers on the panel or in the audience, we've been advocate of embracing technology for so many years, and then all of a sudden, because of the situation we're in, that was totally caught us off guard. I agree with you, Mr. Nasser. We sort of were forced to actually embrace technology. So the rate of adoption has increased, but you should also be aware that the rate of innovation has not stopped. So it's when we come out of this, there'll be so many innovations that actually people have accepted and embraced and digested, integrated in their day-to-day life. So for the digitizers, and guilty as charged, I'm one of them. We sort of, I would say, with a pinch of salt, this is the revenge of the nerds, of the digitizers. 20 years later, people are embracing this, the technology, like, what we're doing right now. Just imagine this in the brick and mortar economy, to have maybe cost 10 times more and took 5 times more time to get together, to get all the distinguished speakers with the immense experience they have in one room. So digitization is there to stay, and it's really accelerating. One thing, and I really like Dr. Brashar, Anita, what you said, and I'll try to say it antitativity, right? So in my world, we've been, I've been responsible for things like education for some time in previous lives, and people were obsessed with content. It's all about the content. Actually, they sort of got it a little bit wrong. It's about collaboration. And collaboration is as important, if not more. And if we understood something from this crisis, that the level of collaboration somehow has increased. And we understood that creating a group with a purpose, I guess having a purpose helps sometimes to create a group and create social capital, is actually has increased, whether it's in the corporate sphere or in the social sphere. So collaboration actually has risen to the level of content. Even I would say it beats content in more than one way. So these are the 3 things that I would I would retain that, there's more and more innovation and adoption of innovation. Digitization is there, and also collaboration is here to stay. The one thing is there is no going back after this. We're going to emerge out of this in what we could call a blended environment, right? So everybody taking a car and going to the same place to sit down in front of a teacher or professor. Maybe this will change. Maybe there will be a blended learning model that emerges that's more efficient, more personalized, and yields better results without taking away the collaborative part and the group and the interaction. So and I want to say something about the Middle East and North Africa region. We have 500 million people. The rate of internet penetration is about 60%. So which means we're looking at 300 million people who actually use the internet every day. They for various reasons. I would submit to you that by the end of the COVID, and if we take this statistics at the end of this year, that percentage would have increased tremendously. And the Middle East and North Africa region is special because we say the MENA region grows younger every day because the under 25 are more than 50%. And going back to the major issue of unemployment that Rafi spoke about and Dr. Anthony also spoke about, this is going to be so painful. It used to be painful before COVID, so the MENA region suffers from endemic unemployment, and the average is much higher than anywhere else in the world. What's really cause for concern is that the divide that exists, the gender divide. So women unemployment is higher, is 1.5 times the average, and the youth unemployment is double the average. So that was pre-COVID. Now, what will happen after that is like nothing short of a tsunami. And the silver lining, though, in all this is that there will be things like that will come to help, like technology. Of course, when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. But I would say the cloud technology is here to stay, and there are industries that will be transformed. And there's a little bit of concern here because we, especially in the MENA region, we built industries on assumptions that were, I would say, mid-20th centuries assumption. Nothing wrong with that, and a lot of countries actually accelerated. Definitely, United Arab Emirates is one of them. However, there is a risk that there is a disruption due to what's happening, and not all these industries will survive. They need to change and change like fundamentally to be able to survive. Talking about, of course, education, healthcare. Now a lot of medical advice is done through telemedicine, e-commerce. Commerce will change, of course, and cashless economies. A dream would be to have cashless economies in some countries. Just imagine the efficiencies it will bring, and the fact that you'll be able to control better taxes and revenues. So all these are silver lining, very much possible, and this acceleration that's happening is will actually help us get there. There are definitely challenges. We talked about unemployment. We talked about the digital divide that still exists. We talk also about the cost of a connection that's still very high in our region. And really, if we, and I sincerely hope that in the United Arab Emirates, I've been here for the last 20 years. I love the place. That voice over IP will stay open after COVID. Thank you. Back to you, Joshua.
Thank you, Salim. I appreciate it. And I want to highlight the first thing that you said. The rate of adoption of technology is accelerating. It's because when we usually think about Silicon Valley and we think about high tech, it's usually on the supply side. We think about the rate of innovation. We don't usually think about the rate of adoption of technology. We don't usually think about the demand side. We usually have this concept of high tech flows from the minds of Silicon Valley whiz kids into the arms of all of us mere mortals here on Earth. But you're right that in the current situation, the rate of that people are taking on board technology is moving at such a high pace. It makes you wonder to what extent these big corporations can even keep up with the demand that's coming from the public, right? And of course, there's a market, so it'll shift over time, and these things will adjust. But it's just an unusual moment that we live in, where people are adopting technology as fast as anyone can produce it, because that's what we have. But what I want to do, yeah, go on, Salim.
I just want to say on this point that people are innovating themselves, so the users are empowered with the new technologies. With the mobile and other. And video was mentioned, so important, right? It empowers people, and they will innovate. It's not only the remit of tech companies to innovate. People are innovating every single day.
Okay, excellent. So if you can go ahead and mute, I'm going to turn it back to Rafiq Maki. Mr. Rafiq, can we talk about, from your perspective, how does an institution develop an investment strategy in the current environment? There's so many uncertainties, there's so many unknowns. We don't need to know specific ideas of investment of what's going on, but just in general, what is a process that anyone can go through to kind of level-headedly and rationally develop a way forward for long-term investment and long-term strategy with so many uncertainties in front of us? Rafiq?
Yeah, Joshua, I'll be glad to give you ideas of investment too. Look, I mean, whenever the future is this unclear, the investment community is cautious, but opportunistic still, right? So the impact of COVID on investment has been varied. So some areas have been devastated. Some areas, for example, like fintech, took a hit, but other areas of investment are doing pretty good. For example, funding of consumer product startups. And I'm going to limit my comments to funding startups because that's what we do here at Mubadala Ventures out of San Francisco. So funding of consumer products has gone up 36% quarter on quarter. So first quarter of 2020 over first quarter of 2019, right? Why? Well, because it's doing very well. So some $3 billion in startup funding has been spent on consumer products. So what does that include? Include food and beverage, gaming, things like home fitness, home goods. So that area is doing well. Now you asked me about a strategy. So the strategy is to be opportunistic, but also the strategy is to reinvest in our own companies that we've already invested in. And why would we do that? Because these are tough times, and some startups might not survive these tough times. So what we try to do is pick out the startups that have the most experience in terms of dealing and managing a crisis. So we look to the leadership of the startups. We look to the founders and their experience in managing a crisis, and we try to support these startups to bridge their liquidity needs during these tough times. So what we'd like to do is first and foremost is maintain the health of the startups we've already invested in. So that's our first priority. And our second priority is to invest opportunistically. Now, investment in general has affected the startup world, as I said, differently in area, but also differently depending on the stage of the startup. So those of you familiar with the startup world, you know that startups initially they request seed funding when they're first formed, and then they go through different rounds, round A, a couple of years later, round B, a couple of years after that, and so on. So the impact of funding on startups has varied by stage. The most hit have been very early stage seed funding type startups. So if you're just starting out, it's been very difficult to attract funding. But if you're doing Series C or Series D, you've established yourself, you're in the right area, you're more likely to attract funding. So back to your question, Joshua, our first priority is to ensure that our current startups make it through COVID. Nobody knows how this thing is going to turn out. COVID, this virus, SARS-CoV-2, is a very, very nasty virus. We haven't experienced in our lifetime anything similar to this. It's very sticky. We all thought it'll be gone by June, July, or at least diminished. We are still in the first wave. People are talking about the second wave. They're wrong. We're still in the first wave. We haven't gotten over the first wave, and it could be 2022 before we get over this. We don't know. So we're going to be cautious. We're going to be opportunistic, and we're going to maintain support of our present startups. And I think Salim wanted to add something.
I just because it's such a fascinating subject, startups, Rafi. It's really so important also for the region. I just want to add a little bit, if you don't mind. There is startup and there is also scale up, if I may use this term, although it's not really very accurate. But the existing number of small and medium-sized enterprises in the Middle East and North Africa region, there are millions of them. So these guys are suffocating. They are like dying right now as we speak because of COVID. If we can provide them with the right help to digitize, to actually move their business online. If you're selling car, auto spare parts, and you sort of inherited this from your family and you want to move online, they don't know how to do it. So we should be somehow cooperating, government funds, private sector, creating this cooperation to actually address full respect for the startup, and they're extremely promising in the region, and we saw some really fantastic successes. But really, what's pressing now is the scaling up of the existing SMEs, and precisely to digitize them and help them get online. Because if you're not online, you don't have a life. You don't have clients anymore, right? And
fully agree, Salim. Fully agree with that assessment. And in fact, you said earlier that the adoption rate is increasing. In the investment world and here in the Silicon Valley and the tech world, we think of COVID as an accelerator of innovation and a catalyst to move innovation forward in certain areas. So there is a positive aspect to COVID, and technology will help us get over it, and technology will help those companies that you're talking about.
Okay, if I can, I'd like to bring it back to Nasser Al-Sheikh. Nasser, can I ask you, have we seen a complete retreat from globalization in terms of globalized supply chains and overseas outsourcing? That's what people were talking about at the very beginning of the COVID outbreak. But you don't hear as much of that talk now, that everything needs to be nativized. Do you think that we could be potentially in a situation where we see a different version of globalization, either a year from now or 2 years from now, once we figure out vaccines and how to use them effectively? What does globalization look like moving forward? Nasser?
Well, that's an important question, but if you allow me, I just need to address a few points that were discussed. Unfortunately, I don't have these. I cannot amuse you with these buzzwords like Dr. Anita. I don't have any. But the thing is, technology. I appreciate what the gentlemen have been saying, but I don't think technology will drive change. Okay, I think technology. I think companies like Google and other big tech companies. They can do a lot of wonderful things, but if there is no consumer and demand for that, service or product, I don't think, I don't think tech will drive it, but tech will enable, as long as there's a need for something. If I look at education, for example, our experience in the UAE for the past 2 decades, we've been e-government was nice to have. And there were these initiatives, as we went along over the past 20 years. And And even in recent months, I mean, government had, one day where they report to work and they do, I think they call it, government without, paperless government. So at least one day in a month, they have to process all applications, everything, but without, any papers in place. And they cannot, receive any people. And I think those experiences enabled us as a country here to adapt quickly. Okay, because we had that infrastructure in place. But I think, we tend to forget one thing. I mean, technology, I mean, it's important to have it and so on. But policymakers are having trouble with that too, And I think Mr. Salim, I mean, he mentioned, our telecom regulator, with all these platforms available, in the world, such as the one that we're using right now, in the UAE, video conferencing was not allowed until the pandemic, But since we went into the pandemic, video conferencing was so important. I mean, to enable students to keep on, going to school, in the virtual world. It enabled government to operate and so on. So I think policymakers are still struggling with that, because even when companies come up with these beautiful apps like contact tracing and so on, we still have some concerns coming on privacy. So I think it's an ongoing process. I mean, let's not fool ourselves and think that we figured everything out. I think it's an ongoing process. It's coming back to globalization. I think globalization, of course, I mean, there was a lot of talk when this started, and I think the US-China tug-of-war did not help, but I think, being caught off guard, I think no country in the world wants to be caught off guard again. Okay, so I think when it comes to certain sectors, and certain, products, I think there should always be a plan B. Okay, so I think what we will see, I don't think, I mean, we will have a deglobalized world. We will still have a globalized world, but we'll have a new version of it. So, when the pandemic started in China, everyone in the world was really worried, because manufacturing lines, I mean, were just stopped, and a simple Apple store in Dubai, in one of the malls here, had the concern that if manufacturing does not restart, they will be out of stock within a month. So I don't think anyone wants to be in that position anymore. I think, as the discussion is going more into a China +1 strategy. So even if you depend on China, you still have to have a plan B, be it in, Indonesia, Vietnam, anywhere else. So we'll still be globalized. Don't worry about it.
Joshua,
may I just address that?
Yeah.
May I disagree?
Go ahead, Rafiq, quickly, and then we're going to go to Omar. Rafiq?
Yeah. So I want to disagree with my colleague Nasser on technology and its effect on change. I think that technology is one of the science and technology have been one of the greatest engines of change, and they affect behavior enormously. Just think of digital social media and how that has altered social behavior. And I don't need to go back to electricity and all the great technologies that have enabled the creation of millions of jobs and have impacted economies and wealth distribution throughout the world. To me, technology and science together impact behavior tremendously.
Okay, I want to go to Omar. Omar, do you want to jump in on any of these?
yes, just your question regarding the supply chains. So initially, as you mentioned, there was a flurry of claims that production is going to be relocalized and international supply chains are going to be decoupled. But actually, there was a recent paper published, I forget the names of the authors, or circulated on the academic economics community looking at this possibility. And the conclusion was that there's not really much point in relocalizing production, you're going to have lockdowns domestically as well. So, for example, if you're importing in Florida from California and you've got a lockdown within the US, does it make a difference if you're getting it from California, if you're getting it from China? You can't still move goods around. Now, a caveat is that some countries are believed to be managed more poorly, and in that sense, they're more susceptible to an outbreak in the first place. In that sense, China is potentially in trouble because its lack of transparency in how it's dealt with the crisis has made people think that maybe it's not very good at dealing with these kind of things, despite some of the public relations efforts it's expended since then. But regardless of the economic benefits of relocalizing production, supposing it is, whether it's better or worse, the reality is that there are populist and mercantilist tendencies in society at the moment, and it's very likely that politicians who subscribe to mercantilist or populist views are going to seize the opportunity to relocalize production, regardless of whether it's actually economically justifiable, because people believe that it's the right thing to do, regardless of whether it is the right thing to do or not. However, we will see if they're willing to pay higher prices. We've had for the last 30, 40 years, the price of all consumer goods has been falling because of all this globalization. Are people going to be happy paying higher prices? I don't know. We'll have to see when they face them. And a final point I'd add to that is, one question we haven't had answered by epidemiologists and a variety of public health experts is, what is the likelihood of future pandemics? So we can't really answer this supply chains question without knowing. So this is the current one is being compared to the Spanish flu, which happened in 1918. So if this is a sort of once in a century thing, then I don't think it's going to change very much because people are quite happy to accept, once in a century crisis. Actually, we've dealt with worse. We've dealt with world wars in between, these kind of pandemics. But if these things are going to happen quite frequently, then it's a different ballgame. And it's not clear to me. There's a lot of people who are screaming at the top of their lungs that this is going to be a regular occurrence. As an economist, I'm not a health expert, I haven't seen any convincing explanation of why we should expect these things to be happening with a high frequency. Pandemics have happened throughout history, but it's not like people have only just been traveling. So, as I say, we'll have to wait and see on those.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Dr. Omar. Dr. Anita, if I can go back to what you were explaining earlier and ask you a question based on that. So if it's necessary to have the sense of belonging in order to do these group endeavors, which are essential to society, and there's a certain degree of feeling that you belong to a group that's necessary, it's necessary to cross that threshold to achieve that sense of communal belonging, then does technology raise that bar or lower that bar? How does technology affect that the way that we come together as a team?
Thank you. That is an excellent question. And I'm going to actually kind of summarize. Mr. Nasser, I'm going to give you the fancy word you're looking for. The buzzword is called socio-materiality. And it brings together I know I have them. I'm an academic. I have all the fancy words, okay? And it brings together, Salim and Rafiq have said too, is that humans make the technology do what we want it to do. So in that way, technology doesn't drive change as much as we're given technology we have to use. And the fact that, yes, adoption has increased very rapidly. It's not just geeks like me doing video conferences, it's everybody is doing a video conference now. It's also that we're learning. We're still learning about how this all works, and we're still going to figure it out. So does technology increase or decrease our belonging? Two answers to that, based on some research that I've done and have just seen. I think it does decrease. It's harder to have interactivity in an online group. Okay, all right. So I'm just gonna throw that back in. So it is harder to have it online. Although I think that these video conferences really help. because these video things, because we can see each other, and we, more importantly, can be seen. If you think about how it is on a phone conference versus a video conference, you can, I mean, I don't, well, maybe you don't, but when I'm on an audio or phone meeting, I sometimes do other things while I'm there. It's a lot harder to do when I know I'm being seen by people. So I'm much more likely to be part of this group and part of the belonging. The belonging is going to be met by this group. So that's the interesting thing. And I think we're making it happen. We need to be, why did everybody jump onto video conferences after we all got put at home? Because we needed to see each other and we needed to be seen. That's that example of socio-materiality, where we make the technology do what we want to do. The other thing I think is really interesting is some research, graduate, a PhD student of mine just finished off, she just defended at the beginning of the pandemic. We're finding that online, we actually develop quicker relationships and more influence when we're looking at this tiny little screen than we do that if we're in a big meeting. And so we're trying to figure out why that is. I mean, there's some research from the 1990s. It's called hyper-personal relationships. But they found that just through email and text, that we would, you would overinterpret the cues that you get through an email and think someone was actually smarter and more attractive just through email. So, you know, that's part of this thing. But I think we're seeing now with video, she found that leaders, bad leaders, had very strong influence on followers when they were online. Whereas they didn't have that influence at all when she was studying it face to face. Bad leaders didn't have much of an influence on people, but bad leaders or people who weren't very charismatic had a lot of influence on people when they were on the screen. And one idea, I think, is that we're staring at a somewhat small screen, and it's taking a lot of our energy and focus to be part of this. And so it's in a room, we might be more distracted by some of the bigger things out there, but more cognitions, more information flowing in. So I think that we have both the positive and the negative, right? It's going to happen. So it's harder to feel like we're part of the group. Although I did want to bring up, somebody was asking about that. It's shared goals. What you want to emphasize in any group to increase their interactivity is get everybody to buy into the goals. You also want to increase their interaction with each other, both formal and informal. That's very important. And make sure everybody is seen, right? That you're not just seeing them, that they're all seen by you. So I think that's the part of getting that interactivity, which I think is a challenge online. Maybe not so much video, but we have an opportunity to have a lot more influence on the people we're communicating with online. Brand new research showing that's what we may be seeing. So that helps.
Okay, no, that's and that leads us where I want to go. I want to go looking into the future. I want to turn this to Salim, but as I do that, I want to really get us to think about how do we look at the long term. I know that's a very difficult thing to do. There's so many uncertainties, but as Salim said, there's no going back. We will have a blended environment coming out of this. I'm personally of the belief that the people who are living through this now at a much younger age are going to develop a certain set of expectations based on it. Expectations about how we interact and how society should function. That will be different from the way I expect society to function or people of my age group. So what I want to do is turn it over to Salim and explore some of this question. What do internet interactions look like a year or 2 years from now? How do you at Google plan for this long-term future? Salim?
So, yeah, thank you, Joshua. Again, very, very interesting question. And you partially answered it, but let me, there's a saying that high tech is only something that was invented after you're born. So airplanes for me were not high tech, and you know the story, right? So for my kids, this technology, they're data natives. They don't care. They're gonna use technology in ways we never ever imagined. Dr. Anita referred to her kids interacting with intensely using video games. Indeed. So the future is definitely, like Dr. Anthony said, is uncharted territory, uncharted waters. you're Christopher Columbus sailing those waters and going towards a brave new world, hoping to discover it. So I would say, so we're not going to shape this. Actually, the digital natives will shape this future, and they will hold us by the hand and show us the way. In a way. However, what we can do, and I just want to go back a little bit to what we do. With the knowledge that we have, with the experience that we have a huge responsibility. And if there is one thing that definitely in the Middle East and North Africa region we should address to pave the way for the youngsters to create those opportunities, is actually to look at the digital policies. And I want to go back to what Mr. Nasser said. The role of the regulators is extremely important, and I really respect what they're trying to do. It's not easy. Put yourself in their shoes. You're sitting in the Middle East, and there is GDPR in Europe, and there is Privacy Shield coming from the US, and the Far East has a totally different view when it comes to data privacy and data governance. So what do we do in the Middle East and the Middle East and North African region? It is a construction site. It is, and there are certain really important matters that must be addressed. I'll just give you an example. Rafiq, you're in Silicon Valley. Intermediary liability, safe harbor created hundreds of thousands of jobs on YouTube. Like 500 hours of content is uploaded on YouTube every minute. And this was due to one stroke of legislation called intermediary liability, saying it's a platform and people who that post and create can do that freely and growth follow. So digital policies are the Alexander's pen, they are the one that will actually, if you remove them carefully, the baby will stop crying and will grow and evolve. So one thing is look at digital policies, and and the role of the regulators in the MENA region is very important, and we should all help them, because nobody can get it absolutely right. Even countries who are highly advanced in this past, like the US or Europe, we all still make mistakes. Us as high-tech companies, we're learning every single day. So that's one thing that will pave the way for the future, which is, we all know is exciting, but I would not dare to say what will happen.
Okay, yeah, sorry about that. I got held up on my microphone. So then if I can turn back to Rafiq. Rafiq, addressing changes in consumer habits, changes in the marketplace, changes in expectations in the marketplace. How do you plan for that? How do you anticipate that moving forward? And where do you think this is going to take us in terms of consumer habits and consumer demand another year, 2 years, 5 years from now? Rafiq? Well,
I think Salim said it already. If you're not online from a provider standpoint, you're going to lose out. And from a consumer standpoint, online is going to grow. We feel that even though the future is very murky at this point, but we have some clarity that cloud services, data centers supporting them, and online tools in general are going to play a bigger and bigger role. The technology has been there. We're using it more now because we have to use it more. And I want to get back to something Anita said about also technology and behavior. Technology doesn't parachute down magically, right? It's done by people. It's done by people, and it's done sometimes by visionaries who imagine how things can be. And they innovate, and they produce new technologies that we welcome because we think it's a great idea. So it does impact us. It doesn't come down magically. People develop technology visionaries see what things can look like, and the future. Who knows, Joshua? You know, there could be some kid today at home involved in some online game that can create something that we haven't thought about that can change our behavior in the future. So future is unknown, but there are some areas of clarity. Online everything, robotics, I think, will play a bigger role in terms of last mile delivery. We have the capability today to use robots for last, let's say, 500 feet or 1,000 feet or whatever, however you want to look at it, delivery. So instead of somebody coming to your door, a robot can show up on your door. Machine learning is going to play a much bigger role. Look for a lot more future smartphones to come with augmented reality capability. And, you know, speaking about adoption rate increasing, you know, virtual reality has been around for a number of years, but we haven't really used it a lot. Well, you know, the more we stay at home, the less we travel, the more we'll use virtual reality. So I'll stop there. Back to you, Joshua.
Okay, Nasser, if I can ask Nasser a question, Nasser Sheikh. My question is this: when we talk about government support to populations, their own populations during this crisis, most of what the newspapers and the media focus on are subsidies and handouts and welfare and unemployment checks, the types of direct financial government support to the population to help get them through the economic crisis. But from what I'm hearing from you, there's a lot of things in the UAE that have taken place where the government has supported the economy through technology or through regulatory and legal frameworks that enable technology. So talking about the government going paperless on certain times, certain days, as Salim was discussing, and what you were saying earlier, Nasser, about the government encouraging paperless transactions, this does put UAE at the forefront to some extent of the technological advance to support the economy. I'm asking you, is that a national advantage, and how can that be leveraged in the future? The types of resources that the UAE has developed with the government enabling, how can that further benefit the economy locally, and how can that benefit partners and friends of the UAE abroad?
Well, I mean, before going into that, I mean, just a clarification to Mr. Rafiq. I mean, I'm not undermining the importance of technology, but I still don't think it will drive change, but it will enable us to achieve, you know, these fabulous ideas that the kid today, you know, a small kid today might have, and you know that. So I mean, importance of technology. I mean, no one is doubting that. But even, I mean, you know, we've been talking about like, you know, the impact of technology. You know, one of the biggest retailers, for example, I mean, in the you know, in the Middle East, called Shelhu, you know, so they had to go through what big groups, you know, have to letting go of people and so on. But the interesting sentence, you know, in their press release was, you know, in 2020 they have achieved their online or e-commerce targets for 2024. You know, so COVID was a catalyst for that. Okay, but still, I mean, if we talk about, you know, other areas like education, you know, education when it comes to you know, small, you know, young children and so on, we still want to, you know, for them to go back to school. Okay, you know, a few parents might choose, you know, the homeschooling option, and their technology will enable that, you know, but you know, most parents, I mean, if you talk to them today, I mean, they want to see their kids going back to school. I think we undermine the you know, the impact, and maybe Dr. Anita might know much more, you know, on that. But we undermine the impact, and I start to gauge it personally when I see, you know, when I visit my father, who, you know, I have not visited physically for about 3 months, you know. So I think, when it comes to impact, especially on the younger ones and the older generation, people, I think we still do not know, the psychological impact of that. We're yet to know that in the days to come. This is just like, being in the Vietnam War and then, seeing a lot of movies about, the aftermaths of Vietnam. So I think we're yet to know that. I mean, when it comes to government, I think one of the first, the most important thing was for us, for the regulator here, the telecom regulator, to open up video conferencing. This enabled life. This enabled the society to interact, with the lockdowns and so on. So I think, when it comes, no single country has a magic solution or a magic pill for that. Support packages, and it does not have to be monetary only, but support packages, whether it's legislation or various form of support, will keep. I think we will still see support packages, being rolled out, and it will be a trial and error. As Dr. John said, in the beginning, this is uncharted grounds. So I think there will be a lot of trial and error. I think, we will depend greatly on technology going forward. I think but we have to differentiate between some changes in our lives today that might enable us, to go on with in our lives until we reach that point where there is a vaccine and we can go back to life as we knew it. But will we go back 100% to the old life that we had? No way. I don't think so. Some changes will be there, but I don't think we will know it yet.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Nasser. We're running out of time, but I still want to go through the rest of our speakers one last time. Omar, Anita, and Salim. Dr. Omar, if I can ask you the same thing. Moving forward, what does society look like a year or two from now in the Gulf, in the Middle East, in terms of government, private sector interaction, public-private partnerships, anything else that you might like to explore? Omar, what thoughts do you have?
You said in 2 years' time in the Gulf, what were you asking about?
What does the public-private partnership look like? How do governments support technological advance moving forward? And what kinds of concerns do governments have to think about with this technological shift?
So I think that one major problem that governments are going to face is that if the health problems continue, because there's no vaccine or this pandemic to become more regular, I believe that people in the region are potentially less predisposed to long-term social distancing than people in other regions. And this could create a sustained public health problem. So to clarify, the region is, Islam is very important to people in this region and is the basis of many of the social norms. Islam is pretty clear about how people should behave during the pandemic. It's very supportive of social distancing during the pandemic. However, at the same time, outside of the pandemic, Islam encourages people to be very sort of touchy-feely, to be very social, to gather, to meet people regularly. Much the sort of opposite of what we expect from Japanese or culture, or some of the Scandinavian cultures which involve less physical contact. And that's what people default to. We're already seeing a lot of that behavioural fatigue across the Gulf, and Saudi Arabia in particular at the moment. So I think that a problem that the governments might face is that if they have to transition to a culture where there's more social distancing, they may find it very difficult to convince people in the Gulf to change because so much of their identity is tied to, going to weddings, going to funerals, presenting, giving condolences, going out with each other, going to residences, and it would be very, very distressing psychologically for people to have to surrender that. And no amount of technological wizardry will be able to overcome that important cultural barrier.
And Dr. Anita, if I can turn it over to you to ask, does this experience that we're all living through, does this create a social bond, at least among the younger generation? Does this reliance on technology create an attachment to technology among a certain group of users? And how is that going to transition to the period after a vaccine is discovered and deployed?
Thank you. Yes. So I've, from a psychology and sociology standpoint, I'm not a big fan of all the different generations we have here. Like, there's Gen X, Gen Z, millennials, blah, blah. I think that the research doesn't actually support that there's that huge variety. That said, I absolutely think we're going to see a cohort develop from this because it's a worldwide event. We have changed the way we interact. We have changed society, and it's happening for more than just a little bit of time. Now, if this stopped at the end of the year and we get the vaccine, that's great. But if this lasts till 2022, I think we're going to see definitely a cohort of our young folks coming of age that are going to be different. And I am not going to predict the future. And I'm going to tell you why. Because in 1994, when the World Wide Web started, I thought that was crazy and that no one would ever want to do that. I thought we had email, we had file transfer protocol, we had Gopher, none of which you know email, but you don't know any of that other stuff. So I'm going to say, I think what I've been hearing is true. Some things are going to stick. We are going to like online meetings like this. This is fantastic, right? That's going to be something we'll continue to do. But we're going to go back to getting our interactions with each other physically because we need that too. So that's my prediction of the future. I'm not the one who wants to predict it.
No, that's great. I can remember 1994, and I can remember my mom. I think my mom got jaffe at AOL.com. And so I was furious, and I immediately went out and got the Hotmail, jaffe@hotmail.com, to compete with her. And it became a fierce competition ever after, back in the day. So Salim, do you have any final thoughts for us about moving forward?
Yes, well, thank you, Joshua. Again, in difficult times, in crisis, what happens is that we saw it in 2008 in major conflicts. People turn to governments for leadership, and you talked about private-public partnerships. Let me add a sort of buzzword, an extra one. So it's going to be a blended world we live in, but definitely it's going to be a public-private people partnership. So I'm adding another P, and that is empowered by the proper policies. So there are 5 P's here for people who wants to the buzzwords. But however, there is a sense of urgency. There is a sense of urgency, and it has to be government-led. So this partnership, public people partnership, and I remind you that the people have a lot of power with the newfound, like mobile and other, and look at the informal economy in countries like Egypt or elsewhere, where the people can actually make a huge difference if they are properly sort of embarked on this route. But there is a sense of urgency to act because, must say, people are in pain today. It's not easy. A lot of businesses are going under, and we must act and act quickly, if I may. Joshua?
Okay. Fantastic. I'm going to turn it over to my good friend and colleague, Mohammed Baharoun. And I just want to thank him and thank everyone at the National Council on U.S. Arab Relations. And I want to thank everyone at the Dubai Public Policy Research Center for everything they've done to put this together. It has been outstanding. Mohammed, I'm going to turn it over to you to wrap things up, respond, conclude, whatever you see fit to do.
Thank you very much, Josh. It's fortunate for all of you that I don't have time to comment on everything that has been said, even though I would love to. When we started discussing this, the idea was, is social distancing going to stick with us in the same way, a failed liquid bomb made us stick with not taking liquids into an airplane? Or is this something that will go away in the same way we've seen things in Paris and London? People go back to the street as if this has never happened. I am very much in line with Slim's idea of a hybrid or a mixed world in which all of this will coexist. And I also agree with Anita that people, being the social animals they are, will take that socialism or sociality with them into whatever means or whatever universe we're in. What we're seeing is a sort of a migration into the cyber world. But it's a migration that is happening until now like a cyber Bedouism. People go to the digital sphere and then they come back and then they go. There might be a time when they will stick there. But I would take her point on video gaming. And my kids do the same. My son would possibly now play more, football on a video game than actually in the pitch. And there is a reason why the video gaming industry is about $150 billion worth. However, the real sports industry is about 500 billion. So there is still of real people interaction going on, and it will continue, I think, with us to a certain degree. Yes, digital societies will stay with us. However, societies are connected to states, to legislation, to governments, to legitimacy. So there are a number of ideas that will be affected as a, let's say, a ripple effect out of that change. To what extent we will need to change things, that is yet to be seen, but this is not the 2-3 years to come. I think this is for the next decade to see. But social distancing, our fear that it will affect globalization, it will raise the barriers in front of our doors, in front of our airports, against people who might come from outside and infect us. It's actually opened up a lot of windows to other people that we're engaging with on a daily basis. I mean, yesterday I had 3 webinars, so it just shows you the extent that those windows has been opened up to us. I would again say I would wish I had time to respond to a lot of your ideas. They've been fantastic. Time is not enough, but it would suffice to say thank you very much for an extremely engaging discussion that did not answer questions, but created new ones, which I think is far more valuable, at least in our line. John Duke Anthony, thank you very much for your support, and thank you for initiating this. And again, thank you from the Public Policy Research Center to all of you and to your team.
Could I respond to your gracious final remark?
I think we're done. I think we've closed it out. Mark?
Hey.
Yeah, we are out.
Yeah.
Can I just suggest that we do in another next month a follow-up, a round 2 of this? This has really been extraordinary, and and I'm not hyping it or coming from left field, but let's give this another month or 6 weeks, and let's have the same people, and let's do a round 2. Let's do it. If we can get everybody to agree, it'll be a lot easier than having to go through the steps of re-inviting everybody. But we'll all know what we're tasked to do, but maybe do a